she's here with us as a visiting Canterbury Fellow. And so I'm really delighted that she is able to present the prestige lecture to us this afternoon. Lynne is internationally esteemed for her research and work in teacher education and digital technologies in schools. She has served and been influential in some major organisations, including serving as president of ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, and was a board member for several years. She's also a member of the American Educational Research Association, AERA, since 1991, I believe, including terms as chair of the annual meeting Policy and Procedure Committee, a chair and member of the SIG Executive Committee, and a member of the AERA Council. Lynne is just finishing her second stint as editor of the Journal of Research on Technology and Education, and she's won significant grants for her work related to STEM education, preparing educators for rural teaching and online coaching and mentoring. Lynne is a well-known author with an impressive list of books, and some of her recent publications include Leading a 21st Century School, Harnessing Technology for Engagement and Achievement, which some of you will probably be quite familiar with in the e-learning lab scene, and also Every Teacher a Leader, Developing the Needed Dispositions, Knowledge and Skills for Teacher Leadership. And that's just a snippet of her very vast publication list that has been of real immense practical and theoretical value to educators and practitioners. And her most recent 2018 book, Learning Supercharged, Digital Strategies and Insights from the Tech Frontier, I think is the inspiration for some of today's presentation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Lynne formally. I've had the pleasure of some time with her over the last couple of weeks and had lots of snippets, but this is going to be a real treat to go sit and listen to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. Oh, yes, I am mic'd. Can you hear it? Oh, excellent. So I'm tethered in the sense that the camera won't go very far. Usually I would be in front of that and trying to engage a little bit. But please feel free to ask questions. I've timed it, I think, so that we will have time for questions towards the end. And those of you who see this as a video production, my email is right there. So if you have a question, please don't hesitate to send it to me. Kia ora. I'm delighted to be here in Christchurch in New Zealand and at the University of Canterbury. It's a treat for me. So I'm going to, as Julie said, a lot of this comes from a very recent year that I've spent on sabbatical investigating work for a new book that will be out in May this year. And what I'm going to try and do is talk about the changes in learning that I've learned about in my work, but looking at it through a lens that includes pedagogy, leadership, technology, and community, if you can kind of think of all those pieces. I did a lot with public and private institutions, schools, primary schools, secondary schools, formal and informal educational experiences that people have. United States, a lot from New Zealand, and yesterday I had an opportunity to visit 3 more schools, which I'll probably weave in here because I was very impressed. As you can see, I've traveled a bit to see some of these schools. It's been the best part of investigating. And then the book includes a lot of what we're calling spotlights, which are stories from practitioners, from teachers, from leaders, from museum directors, all kinds of people who tell their story because they can tell it better than I certainly could. So this crazy picture tries to represent, and I bet that everybody in here could make it look much better, it tries to represent the conundrum that I had as I thought about this book. I don't like books that are just focused on, that are technocentric, but I do have chapters on STEM and coding, robotics, the maker movement, gamification and gaming, and next waves, what's coming. But I wanted to intersect them to bounce them against the things that I think really drive our educational experiences, which are pedagogical, so project-based learning and personalization, digital citizenship, which is becoming so important on many layers, and then equity, which I think there are some people who suggest that's gone away. that we don't need that focus anymore, but I'm here to tell you I don't agree. And then the new blending that we're seeing so much more of with the formal educational experiences and the non-formal and informal experiences. So I've tried to weave that together in this book. Maybe if you read it, you can tell me if I've done that, and I'll try and do a little bit of that today. Well, first let's look at this focus on STEM and STEAM, the arts, robotics, coding, which is happening everywhere, as far as I can tell. It's being touted, and there are some places where it's mandatory now to have some amount of coding and STEM. Yesterday I saw some children in very young ages doing robotics, and I've got some pictures that I took in other places, but the idea of computational thinking, I think, drives this focus. I want to tell you about a school district that's in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has some unique attributes because it is, at least Pittsburgh, has a lot of foundations which have money to give and to seed things, which always helps innovation, I believe, and a lot of energy that focuses on the schools and the libraries and so forth. They did a total shift. The superintendent really did a shift from a traditional sort of school system to computational thinking. And they did it in a lot of ways. They created STEAM teachers for all of the primary and intermediate grades. Every 2 grades had one STEAM teacher. They changed positioning, so they renamed positions and they refocused what these people did to support this computational thinking. They had STEAM literacy and technology teachers co-teaching Innovation Studio and other kinds of things. I'll tell you an example. And they created a STEAM team, which is not so easy to say, where they met several times each semester so that there was a focus. But they also included a lot of people in the process besides the educators. They included the bus drivers and everybody. So everybody knew the idea of what they were doing. They also built partnerships with Carnegie Mellon and other institutions in the Pittsburgh area, the foundations and so forth. We went and visited them and saw some very interesting things. One that stands out to me was some high school students who were working with a company designing, there's a company that made pots and pans, and they gave a task to the students, and the students were designing a pot. Now, those of you who know me know I don't really cook anymore, but I was still intrigued by this. A pot that would know the recipe, you'd tell it the recipe, and the pot would fix the temperature as things happened. It would beep you on your phone when you had to add the next ingredient. And I know, I thought maybe I could start cooking again. They also had younger students designing things with problems to help solve problems. And one of my favorites was a child whose grandmother was using a walker, something that eventually maybe all of us will end up with. And they were worried that if the walker tipped over, nobody would know. And so they developed something that the walker would signal the daughter of this elderly woman if the walker tipped over, which I thought was pretty good. So we also saw 8-year-old children debugging programs, which we thought was pretty impressive. Their lessons were to rethink the system from the beginning, zero sum, start with nothing and build up. What do you want to do? The vision, project-based learning drove their process on everything. They involved their board, which is similar to the boards that run your schools, but also the community, as I said, the library, the museums, and so forth. And they found partners. And they also developed a lot of after-school programs, knowing that there were lots of people who couldn't fit everything into their schedule. So it was a pretty impressive, this school district, South Fayette, has been well recognized as leading innovation and change. The maker movement, trust me, I would like to talk about each one of these for a long time because there's so many interesting things going on. The maker movement is another one that we see everywhere. I know that your new building will have a maker space, which is very exciting. And yesterday in 3 of your schools, I saw maker spaces where things are very interesting happening with the students. But nowadays, we can't ignore this project because, this idea, really because it's everywhere. And when you think about what is being made in just 3D printing, for example, we know that there are some potential that our students need to know about from the very beginning. But even more importantly, it's the idea that goes back to Seymour Papert on construction. How do you construct your own knowledge? And I think that's something that maybe some of our efforts at curriculum have taken out. One of the schools I interviewed is in outside of Auckland. I'm not going to, is it Tupaki? Tupaki. Where they have a very small school, but they designed a make club. And they include the community to come in, parents, grandparents, people. The students drive the making, whatever they're interested in making, and I was very impressed with that school. I'm still hoping I'll get up there and get to see that one. There's another maker school that's in Queenstown called Shotover, and I'm going to go visit that school soon. But there's a new philosophy about making that I've come to investigate. Some researchers got grants, and they designed 2 projects that talk to students before they start making. It's not just come in here and play and think about what you want to make. It was a dialectic where the student and the faculty member, the teacher, talk about what's important to that child. What problem could you solve? This is a light-up desk. Now, I have to tell you that I don't remember my school days of having desks, but this young lady who was in 7th grade, about 12 or 13 years old, they have a very short time to get the correct book out of their desk. And she was always having trouble finding it. So she decided to make it light up so that she could find things quickly when she needed them, the pencil or whatever it was. And she created a battery that you could crank so that it would light up her desk. And there's a picture of it, which I think is quite remarkable. There are a couple of other projects from the same 2 researchers. One was a young man in Detroit, an African-American gentleman in Detroit, Michigan, which is not one of your necessarily safer cities in the States. And he was very concerned about his friends and parents and relatives who may get into difficulty if they're wearing a hoodie. Would a hoodie be the same, with a hood? So he created a hoodie that had battery-operated voice recognition and voice alarm so that he could push a button and an alarm would go off and say, "Help, I need help now," if he were being accosted by anyone. Another young man felt that one of their activities after school was football, our football, not yours, that sort of elliptical ball that they throw. But in Detroit, Michigan, it gets dark very early in the winter. And so they would have time, but not the ability to play football. So he spent almost 7 months creating a football that would light up. It had to have balance. It had to be able to go. Couldn't get too hot, obviously, or you might burn something. But he was so persistent in making this happen, and ultimately he was able to donate it to an after-school club for his younger brother. Very interesting. All over, we're seeing back to inventing and building and thinking coming out of the maker movement at every level. A lot of places, one in Sitka, Alaska, allows students to figure out what they need to build. It's a very rich environment where the native population is about half of the city of Sitka, and they have a culture and tradition of several building boats and some other kinds of things that they have incorporated into their maker classes. And it's not just in schools. This first picture is a mobile lab that's in a hospital, a children's place in a children's wing of a hospital where the kids often have downtime, not much to do, and so they created this mobile lab. Art museums now, the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh has a huge makerspace where the number one goal is nothing is fake. So we don't have plastic nuts and bolts to protect the children. They use real nuts and bolts. And then one of my favorites is the Geek Bus, which is in San Antonio, Texas, and it goes around to schools, both for teachers and for students, to bring making to them if they are in schools that can't subsidize that. And some of the lessons we learned about that was that it had to be adaptable for your particular location. One had to have locked cabinets, another didn't, and so forth. And that if you're making a space, it needs to be reconfigurable, if that's a good word. And that the technology is ubiquitous, which we've all been talking about for maybe 30 years, that people just, the technology, we don't have a class on using pencils, and we probably don't need a class on using the digital tools these days. We also see lots of opportunities for leaving the building, either physically or virtually. If you think about the new Google Cardboard, where you can take virtual field trips that are three-dimensional and 360 degrees to look at something rather than a one-dimensional kind of view. What about the other aspects of super learning? Well, I think there are lots of them. And number one would be, to me, would be digital citizenship, which includes so many layers of protecting our privacy, teaching children to protect their privacy, safety so that they don't get involved in things that they shouldn't. They don't give out information they're not supposed to give out. But it also includes certainly digital bullying, which is a real problem, I think, globally. And we certainly have seen some sad results of that going on. The University of Michigan has Preservice Teachers, so teachers to be, working in middle schools, intermediate schools, I think here they would be, working with 6th, 7th, and 8th form kids to design public service announcements and other kinds of things to prevent bullying on all kinds of things, identity, footprints, reputation, those kinds of things. Now, I'm also going to point out this book, Wonder, which is on the side. And yesterday I was in a school and I mentioned it to the woman taking us around, showing us the classes. And their whole school also has been reading Wonder. But I came upon a library media person in a small town in Texas who was so, if you don't know this book, I recommend it highly. It's about a young man who has, some of you know it, I can see some nods, who has very severe facial anomalies. And he's been kept at home for homeschooled for the first several years of his life, and now he's 10, going into 5th grade, and his parents decide to send him to a school. You cannot read this book without crying unless you are much stronger than I am. But this library media person in Texas became so enamored with it, and they were having some problems, that she wrote a grant and got 800 copies of the book, half in Spanish, half in English. And everybody read it in the school, the superintendent, the bus drivers, the teachers, the parents, and so forth. And they also loaded them up in the library, and the town adopted the book. So the mayor, all of the fire chief, everybody was reading this book, and there was a movie that came out about it last November, and they bought out the house of the movie theater, and everybody in the town went to the theater to see the movie. So again, it gets at cyberbullying in a way that is, I think, reaches the population for whom it was intended. It's really, I think it's been translated into about 25 languages, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to look that up. So, pedagogy. We could have all the digital tools we want, and as someone once said, we could put a piano in the middle of a classroom, and that would not, by osmosis, make everybody a musical genius. Similarly, we could put lots and lots of digital tools in every classroom, and I believe if we don't change the pedagogy that drives our teaching, in fact, that's probably one of the reasons for doing so, is to change that pedagogy, we may not see any changes in what happens. What do students really need to learn these days? Do they need to know the capitals of every country in the world? I have no answer to that. I have an opinion, but I ask it for each of you to understand. But how do we foster the interdisciplinary functions of schooling? How do we get people not to learn about history by time? You know, what happened in 2006? What happened in 1922? And, of course, assessment rather than assessment of learning. We talk about assessment for learning. How do we use the assessment tools we have to help us know what students need? And the authentic aspect of really encouraging the wondering. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, it's going good. So one of the things we've seen is project-based learning. And I think the importance of this, and again, I saw some examples yesterday in your schools right here in Christchurch that were just amazing, is the idea that there's no one right answer, that there isn't a simple yes, no, true, false, or A, B, C, D answer to the complexity of problems that we hope the next generation will help us solve. Heaven knows we have enough problems in the world. So they work on projects with depth, complexity, duration, and relevance to the real world. We've seen schools where the students are solving problems that adults might also be working on, we hope. And it also helps them be active in their own knowledge. So they help decide. You might have a big topic, but then the students can look at different aspects of that problem based on their group or their individual desires. And I think reflective thinking, sometimes in schools, that's one of the pieces that's left out. And so we see that happening. Yesterday I saw a project, it's called Link Ed. I don't know if apparently a principal here in New Jersey wanted an LMS that was robust enough to do the things he wanted it to do. And so he, of course, had to invent it himself. And it's being used in several schools in New Zealand. I don't think it's gone beyond New Zealand, but it encourages students to blog constantly about reflecting on their learning, on what their goals are. It gives teachers a chance to do that. It gives the opportunity for a teacher to see something wonderful in a student rather than us only connecting with families when something doesn't go very well. It's the opportunity to say, Sam, I saw you working with some younger children and your relationship building was exceptional. You were very gentle with them or whatever. And the parent gets notified of that too. What a great thing to have happen in that. So we've seen some examples that really defy description. In one school, they created a dream factory. They took a whole wing of the school, they just renovated it and made it so that math, art, computer science, and industrial arts all work together. And the four components help design projects that are rich, long-lasting, and iterative in all of these areas, so they're working together. Students also created a wonderful, I don't know if you know Rube Goldberg. Does that name mean anything? You might want to look it up. It's Rube Goldberg was somebody who created the most complex way to do simple tasks. Now you might say, why? Which is a good question, but it's actually the way I learned about physics was playing with Rube Goldberg type things. And how to go 3 different things to make a piece of toast or something. And so they challenged these students to create the most complex way to do something simple. And if you haven't seen that, I really encourage you to look up Rube Goldberg. He was quite an amazing scientist. In the States, we have a network of schools. It's now up to about 150 called New Tech High Schools, where everything is project-based learning. They are typically smaller schools, and all the classes are reinvented with 60 or more students. They're not children at secondary school. 2 or more classes, 2 or more content areas. So history and English going together makes sense. Biology and health and physical fitness. So they teach in interesting ways. Geometry and digital media. Very interesting kinds of things that we've noticed. And then one of my favorites, because it's run by people that I know in Hong Kong, and it's called the Harbour School. It's a private school in Hong Kong. They do everything project-based learning. Now, if you think about Hong Kong, they're on the ocean, and they have all kinds of possibilities. The man who helped start the school, Craig Blurton, is a sailor. I mean, he likes to sail always. And so they take advantage of where they are, and everything is done in projects. And I have some pictures of some of the things that they've done. They don't leave out the arts. I don't think they sail with the singing, but they include everything all together. They study an area, and then they often will sail to that area to investigate it further. I thought, gee, that would really be fun, wouldn't it? But the students seem to learn pretty remarkable aspects. And again, private schools have a little bit better opportunity, I think, at least certainly in my country. I don't know about here. But they do have a little bit more flexibility. Oh, some more of the Harbour School. Well, and then we get to, I'm just going to take a sip of water. One of the things I've been most impressed with is the blending of the formal and the informal and non-formal. If I ask you, how did you learn to drive a car? How did you learn to knit? How did you learn to cook without a pot that tells you what to do? Most of us learned it in very informal ways. And those are some of the best things that we know how to do. They're typically somewhat procedural. But we now see, I like to think it's because schools are in need of assistance, but we now see a lot of museums, libraries, private corporations, other kinds of entities coming together to offer things to schools and to students, to learners. One example is the Carnegie Mellon, which is a private university in Pittsburgh again. And they do not have a college of education, but they do have something called the CREATE Lab. And CREATE stands for Community Robotics Education and Technology Empowerment Lab. I have to put that in because I never remember what it stands for. But it's designed to encourage community technology fluency. So it really is bringing together computer scientists, engineers, artists, educators, all kinds of people to create things that would be useful to, again, solve problems or generate enthusiasm in our spaces. I'm going to tell you about a couple of theirs. So the Children's Innovation Project was designed by a kindergarten teacher, which I love because that's just fantastic, and we know kindergarten teachers often are the most creative. She wanted kids to understand how things work, as opposed to, oh, look, that thing goes. How does it work? What makes it run? How does electricity happen? But, you know, if you think of the most recent 5-year-old you've dealt with, their little hands are very tiny. And if you think about the alligator clips that usually we have for electricity, they're little tiny. So she worked with somebody, and they developed large clips and visible kinds of things to teach kids about electricity and then how to make things go and so forth. Now, I will tell you that her story is that the parents in the first group of kindergartners that she was trying this out on did talk about their children taking lots of things apart to figure out how they work and not being able to put them back together again. But she thought that was okay, and the parents obviously did too. This is now a project you can buy for kindergarten kids, and so the Create Lab tries to spin things off. They also have a Finch Robot, which is very easily programmed for young computer programmers. One of the ones I love is if you know of any 3, 4, 5-year-old and you ask them, tell me about your day, it's like nothing. They didn't do anything all day. So they created, it's called Message from Me, and a student goes over to an iPad or a computer in this case, but they mostly use them with iPads, pushes a button and can take a picture of what he or she just drew or what they made or the building they build with the blocks, and narrate it and send it directly to mom or dad or grandma's phone. So now when I pick that child up, I can say, wow, that was such a big castle you built. Tell me more about it. So that's been very popular. And the Create Lab partners with schools, but they also have set up a network of partnerships with Preservice Teachers, teacher education colleges. So when I was in West Virginia University, we had a Create Lab, and we integrated the tools within our science and math and other kinds of labs and pre-service teaching methods classes, and then they took kits out to the schools and used them with the students that they were doing practicum or internships with. Another kind of interesting connection, there's an aquarium it's in the top of Kentucky in the U.S. Right across the river is Cincinnati, Ohio, and they have this aquarium has a foundation, and the design is, for the purpose of the foundation is to promote knowledge and information and research and scientific models of what's happening in our waterways. So they have this shark cart that they take to schools, and they teach about how to study about sharks and what we know about sharks. The students design research projects, and it's a connection. And any class that they've gone to can go to the aquarium for free, of course, and so this is a synergy kind of program. Microsoft, you know, depending on your view of Microsoft, it's a big company, it makes lots of money, but sometimes they do things that are altruistic, or we can hope they're altruistic for the population in general. I like to believe it. And they have something called Skype in the Classroom. They set it up, it's free. Your class can Skype with authors. They can Skype with children in other classes, and they'll set those up for you. They can Skype with scientists and other people. So they have quite a variety of opportunities, especially for students who probably are not going to get to take trips across the ocean and so forth. So this is a 3rd grade class in New York, and they've been Skyping with people all over the world, and they write stories about what they've learned and so forth. The Smithsonian Institution, which is, if you've been to Washington, D.C., you might know of the Smithsonian museums, which are free to anybody. And there are quite a number of them, a variety of them, but one is the Science Museum. And they created a pilot. They want to get their information and their process and everything out to the public. Well, that's not so easy to do. And so they created a pilot also with the Cincinnati Public Schools, which is doing some very innovative things. And they have explainers. This young lady in the red shirt is an explainer, which is a term I quite like. They work with the students in classes, and these are 6th grade students, and they teach them about something, and then the students spend several weeks in designing and investigating something to do with the project that they've learned about. And then the next time they meet electronically, the students do the explaining, tell them about their research, tell them what they found. The explainers ask questions, and it's a process that they are going through. Again, a great partnership that encourages exploration and scientific thinking. Of course, there are many, many art museums that do the same kind of thing with art, whether you're going there personally or whether you're just going there virtually, getting you ready for what it is that you want to see. And sometimes you just have to look online and you can design a project that takes you through a certain period in art. And then we come to digital equity, which is one of those things that I think we wish we could solve, but is much more of a wicked problem than many others. There are, in the U.S., it's estimated that 7 out of 10 teachers give assignments that require access to the internet. And yet lots of students don't have access at home. And they can't necessarily stay late in the school, and they may not be able to get to a library or a computer of any sort. So what are we going to do? And here's some solutions that have come up. They've been very creative. One school district that has long commutes called it the Rolling Study Hall pilot, and they reinvented that commute by putting the internet and devices, but also teachers who could help solve problems if they weren't sure of what they were doing, which I thought was very creative. I can't imagine how difficult it would be to have a long drive home and be just sitting there, maybe punching your neighbor. Many places they turn Wi-Fi on for the community when not in session. They might park wired buses in a community space. I know in Auckland, Dorothy Burt's school turns the Wi-Fi open to the public, to her community when school's not in session. Many of them offer computers and hotspots to families. New Zealand is doing a lot. I know that right here in Christchurch there was recently a pilot offering devices and internet to families that have no access. So those are the kinds of things. In our country we have something called advanced placement classes. And those advanced placement classes are often offered, they can earn you college credit. And they're offered typically in the more affluent schools. They have more students taking them and so forth. Several public schools now have seen the disadvantage of that it's not equitable. So they offer students who are eligible to take those classes by having achieved in that content area, whether it was math or science or a foreign language, the opportunity to take the class electronically and then also give them the equipment and the Wi-Fi to be able to do that without them having to pay for it. More examples, there was a STEM school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the students really wanted to have access to a scanning electron microscope. I confess I'm not sure what you do with one of those, but it sounds very impressive, and it costs $1 million. So there was practically no possibility that this small school was going to be able to afford $1 million, that's US dollars, just in case, to buy one. So a team at the University of Southern California, added a high-definition camera to their scanning electron microscope and made it available to the students that they could manipulate it and run tests and so forth. Several cities have developed a digital manager whose job it is to make sure that it's equitable not just in our schools, but across the community, which is also a very important aspect that we don't want to forget. Several cities have come up with technology funds. If you think about people who don't have access, they may not be able to apply for a job. In New Zealand, they might not be able to do their census. There are all kinds of things taking advantage of information on health and so forth would take that. This actually comes from a few decades ago. In Scandinavia, there was a project called telecottages, which I just fell in love with back in the old, as my grandchildren would say, in the olden days. Everybody didn't need a fax machine, a printer, a computer every day. So they would create a cottage, basically, a space where these things were available, and anybody in the community could come in and use it appropriately. So in some ways, they're trying to recreate that model, which is interesting. Libraries have taken up the challenge, and many libraries are offering ready-to-code classes and machines and support, because schools might not have that available to them. Lots of public-private partnerships. Again, I try not to bring up private entities like Microsoft or Google, but I think they've seen that it's in their best interest to help schools. So Google partnered with 50 low-income schools in North and South Carolina in the U.S. To create the Dynamic Learning Project, where they made access available. And even in Rio de Janeiro, I don't know if you've been there, but the favelas are some of the very poorest areas in our world, I think. And they have started wiring the favelas in ways by linking wires and having central location boxes and getting funding from their government so that anybody can have access to what they need. Very interesting. So what's the role of leadership in all of this? It's impossible for me to say anything that is less than important, the importance of the leadership. As I mentioned to a couple people who came in earlier, I saw 3 schools, 3 very different leaders yesterday in Christchurch, and in each one, the leader was making a huge difference. And I'm going to read this to you because, to me, it's very important. This woman is the superintendent of the Sitka Public Schools in Alaska, very rural, very far away, doing some amazing things. And she sees herself as a talent scout. She says, I became a talent scout looking for teachers and groups of teachers who had an idea that pushed the envelope of educational technology use. We then made sure that these teachers had the resources and learning opportunities they needed to implement their idea. The teachers became the lighthouse examples of what can be, which helped their colleagues see in practice what they were learning in their professional learning communities. I had the great fortune of being up there last end of August. It was the first week of school in their school district. And when the superintendent asked the teacher, would you let this visitor come in and observe, they typically will say yes, even though it was the 3rd day of class. And here was a teacher, an amazing teacher of 2nd graders, and you remember how squirmy and squiggly kids who have just entered 2nd grade are or can be. And she was teaching them, they were doing the story of the gingerbread boy, and she was teaching them on this day Aussiebots, which are the little tiny robots, how to program so that they could represent the story of the gingerbread boy, stopping at the old man and the old lady and the whatever. Now, if I had been that 2nd grade teacher, I might have said, oh, we're not doing anything interesting today. Please don't come into my classroom. She said, oh, no, come on in. It's wonderful. And she just had the patience of amazing woman, as I guess 2nd grade teachers really need to have. But but again, she had a passion. She also teaches Mindstorms. No, Minecraft. Yes, thank you, Minecraft. Mindstorms is Seymour Papard's book, of course. And her superintendent said, what do you need to live out your vision, to make your class what it's supposed to be? And they figured out what she needed, and she got the resources that she needed. I think that they also have a sixth grade teacher who teaches history, and she is really involved in gamification. She wanted to turn her entire course, the whole semester, into a game, and she needed some materials and some other things, and they made sure she had it, and then she went forward, and she told her story. It was pretty impressive. So one of the things that we've learned is that just like students need personalized learning many times in their careers, so do teachers and educators, and that one size just doesn't fit all. So in Cincinnati, they have the digital bus, and they go around to schools. They talk to the principal to find out what he or she wants them to do. And it can be as simple as giving teachers free time, getting a sub for part of the day so teachers can go in there and learn the latest or whatever. Or it could be for a group of teachers learning a particular program or whatever it is that school needs. And they get around to everybody. It's a pretty impressive place inside that bus. So the themes that, themes that have emerged to us, we're seeing active learning be reimagined. I mean, we all talk about active learning, but I've seen firsthand so many examples of how creative educators are in rethinking what they want to do. Distributed leadership, I believe, I saw everywhere, and that, to me, that's what supports this kind of innovation. The lens of equity and access was equally visible. There was a school in Florida that everything they want to do before they do anything says, how will this affect all access to all children? What are we doing to make sure that it's equitable before they do any new project? And this new blending more than ever of the formal, informal, and non-formal really takes that whole community. My final takeaways, educators were passionate, dedicated. I was just blown away. I mean, I know that. Many of us in here have been teachers in the K-12 or primary, secondary roles, and you don't stay there if you're not passionate and dedicated. The leaders were essential. One thing I know more now than I even believe I knew before was how important it is that learners have input in helping design their education. And the best results were when the partnerships were strong throughout the community, when a school wasn't trying to do it on its own. So, my 3 words: enable, engage, and empower. And then, thank you. I'm not able to say that in Maury, but I thought I'd at least have it up there. Questions, comments? We've still got some time.
I'm going to ask you a naughty question.
Oh, Nikki.
Yeah, because you talked about equity, and the one that really got me was the favelas. Okay, so I had a colleague in Iowa State University who used to essentially he's a computer scientist, but also he was a multidisciplinary himself, and he was worried about the stalking of kids and other misbehavior. So when you just open things up, you open a Pandora's box. Isn't that dangerous?
Yes, of course it is. I agree with you 100%. In the favelas, it's actually being very thoughtfully done. Now, I think any school around here, any child, any teenager is in danger of those kinds of things. And so, again, that goes back to the digital citizenship writ large. But But denying access because we're afraid is, I think, the wrong answer. That would be, we would never let anyone, we would never put our 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds behind a wheel of a car, which many of us might think would be a good thing that they didn't get behind it. But so with access has to come learning. And there's one man who's kind of known for this in the favelas, and I'll get you the citation because he's doing it in a very thoughtful way. But yes, I agree totally. It's a good question. Thank you, Nikki. Oh my. No comments?
I have a comment.
Oh, good. Oh, there you go. Yes.
Yeah, what I can see there is the construction of curriculum, which is like utopia. It's like something that we pursue for such a long time. In that regard, how do teachers, how does the school go about thinking, establishing?
Yeah.
What's the parameter? What comes first? Because we still, into this first, second, third, fourth. So how do they manage to reconceptualize that sense of curriculum sense?
It's a great question. It really is. And I've seen two models, and I don't think there's any one that's better than the other. I think it depends on your context and your culture. But one is like the South Fayette School District, where they just said the whole school district is going this way. That's it. We're going. And then it's step by step, and it's giving people what they need to make those transitions. An example of that was in the United States, when your class has a special library or computers or something, often the teacher will drop the kids off, maybe it's music or art, and go prepare the next lesson. But they wouldn't let them do that. They had to be learning with the children, which is wonderful. But then there's the other model, which is Mary's model in Sitka, Alaska, which is to find the nuggets and foster it, and then encourage others to come in and see, to share it, things like that. So I don't think there's one way. Yesterday I saw a school right here in Christchurch where they really want to foster the idea of project-based learning, collaboration, and so forth. And they'll be moving into a new building in the next years to come that will create those spaces that teachers were going to have to kind of do that. So they've started now by offering ideas for project-based learning. They tried with a pilot of, a few weeks. Then the teachers got excited, and now is everybody going to get on board? Maybe not. Another way I know from previous research where they said we're changing the school, and you can apply for your job if you like this new model, or we'll help find you another job. Yesterday, another school has a very open program that we saw, wildly open, very few walls. And when they hired all new teachers, and they gave them projects to do as part of their interview that were collaborative. Oh, fantastic. So they might say, I don't like that. I'm not coming to this school, which would be okay. Or they might say, I love this, please hire me. So there are all kinds of ways. You're not going to do the whole school necessarily in one step. Even in South Fayette, it took time. But you're right, it's utopian. But if we can do it in a variety of different schools, maybe there are steps to be taken in lots of other schools. Cheryl, you had a comment? Sorry?
No, I think, and it probably follows up a little bit about yours as well. There are so many good ideas here, and I think what's interesting is it almost enables one to be a little bit braver about some of the innovations you try, because innovations are a risky space. And I think your experience through the voices of other people will really
No, that's good because in previous research, one of the things that we found, my colleague and I, is that it's really important for the leader to foster risk-taking. None of us, and especially classroom teachers, I think, tend to be, pretty careful. That's a good word. So taking risks, and I've told this story before, I think even here. My favorite school leader, this was a while ago, he got a plunger, a toilet plunger, a new toilet plunger, and he spray painted it gold. And at their staff meetings every month, the person who would get up and say, I tried this, it failed miserably, but here's what I've learned, and here's how I'm going to do it better next time, would get the golden plunger in their room for a month. And I thought, okay, now that's fostering risk-taking. It's beautiful. So, you have to do that. Yesterday, someone asked me that question, and I said, I'm not a mountain climber, a rock climber anymore. I did it once, long ago. But the rule about rock climbing is you can move 1 foot and 2 hands, 3 things, you still got the foot. But to make any progress, you have to eventually move the second foot. That's risky because you don't know what's going to happen. But we all have to be a little brave, I think.
And that's interesting in relation to the digital citizenship, because what I'm looking at, that I'm interested in, is digital resilience. And there needs to be some risk-taking to actually develop the resilience that enables you to cope with the risks. And there's an interesting movement in early childhood in terms of children playing outside. It's the same thing. Should children be climbing trees? It's only 3 doing some of these things. And I was actually reading on stuff today about a kindergarten where the whole kindergarten is outside and they've got the children doing all these things. And of course, schools are bound by the health and safety regulations that now have become so enormous that a lot of the risks that maybe children had taken years ago have gone to the point where often children will never walk to school by themselves.
Right.
But what it's actually doing is actually taking away the ability to develop the resilience that only comes with taking the risk. So it's a really interesting relationship between the risk, safety, and having the resilience that actually enables you to, I suppose, operate in the world.
That's brilliant. A lot of things that I've seen are based on Reggio Emilia, which when I went there, they had a 3-year-old, which is an early childhood model from Italy. And they had a 3-year-old grating carrots. And, of course, all I could think of was this kid's going to grate their fingers. We're going to have, disaster. No, if you help them do that, they'll do it. And yesterday I saw an engineer who was didn't like being an engineer, became a teacher at the Selwyn House yesterday, and they had maybe 5th grade, 6th grade, something like that. They were solving a robotics problem, and his thing was, it's so hard for me not to step in, and want to help them solve it, but he has to let them. And one team was just having terrible, but they had resilience. They just kept plowing through it. So I think this is going to turn off in a second.
So let me just do the thank yous.
Oh, okay.
So it's just something small from us.
Oh. Oh, yes, you have to be over here.
I just wanted to make some comments. I mean, I know that Lynne is a very accomplished author, but what we've been able to hear about today is we've got like a 4-5 month preview on this wonderful book that's only going to come out in May. And I feel like we've had this fantastic sort of, set of insights from you. And I think what makes it even more valuable is so often esteemed academics have a very strong personal perspective, but your perspective is driven by your experiences of other people and the stories that you're bringing from their classrooms and contexts, which is so rich. And I think so, I mean, I was sitting there thinking, isn't it just, it's really spoke to me that you were able to foreground the issue around equity and the issue of risk at the same time, and that we can't protect, we have to take risks, we have to do things, we have to find strategies that really challenged us as teachers not to be cautious, but to be
I suppose, to be innovative and gutsy and then to do the learning. But I mean, it was also just lovely to hear from a wealth of things.
Thank
I can't
you.
wait to read these chapters in detail and look at the references and everything. So thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
And I know it's been, and this is not the end of your stay, but it's been lovely to have you
Oh,
here
thank you.
in our lab and at UC. So
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you. Oh, wow.
We have to do this in front